Welcome everyone to another episode of The Inside Word. My name is Lachlan McLean from Beer Cartel, Australia's #1 craft beer retailer. For our 14th episode, I chat to Dave Padden, founder of Sydney's IPA Masters Akasha. We discuss a range of topics including the history of Akasha, the stories behind the beers, and we also take a deeper look into the Australian craft beer scene from Dave's experience as a board member of the Independent Brewers Association. Welcome, Dave, and thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Before we kind of dive into the Akasha story, these podcast is also around the inside word and kind of where they all came from. I know you were an avid home brewer, but I thought we'd kind of go into how you actually got into craft beer, into beer in the first place.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's sort of a little while ago now for me. But look, I used to be involved in the IT game for many years on the sales and marketing side. So was lucky enough to travel a lot of travel to Asia, but also a lot of travel to the United States, where a lot of people, but certainly myself, fell in love with craft over there quite a few years ago now, 10, 15 years ago. Things like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale and all the classics that were around at that time. And so that's where I fell in love with beer initially, never looked back, as they say.
Yeah, right. So I guess the classic, the Cascade hops, I think, which obviously feature in a lot of your beers now, but
all those
classic West Coast styles. Was there a beer that I guess kind of really piqued your interest in it?
Oh, look, I think definitely, around the time of the that time Sierra Nevada, that time also in Australia, we had Little Creatures Pale Ale obviously coming out. So definitely they were big influences on me as a drinker and a brewer. But I think, particularly with the styles of beer that I and we've been brewing over the last few years, particularly, beers like Pliny the Elder have had a very, very large impact on me, both as a style of beer, but also I've been lucky enough to meet the guys that brew these beers as well, and certainly taken on a lot of cues on how to brew these beers as well. But Pliny the Elder never gets old for me. Can never drink enough. In fact, a mate of mine gave me a nice fresh bottle just on the weekend, just gone. Thank you, Brendan.
Oh, fantastic. You mentioned there about you got tips from them. Were you homebrewing before you got into it, or did that kind of get you into homebrewing?
It certainly got me into homebrewing. I got into craft. I saw around the same time, but certainly I was mucking around with extract and Cooper's kits and all that kind of stuff quite a few years ago. But I think definitely around the time I started drinking some great beers, particularly in the States, sort of got me into home brewing a lot heavier and a lot more, started to move into all grain and all that kind of stuff. And, like most serious home brewers, ended up with a mini version of what I do today in the backyard.
Yeah, right. How long were you home brewing for?
Oh, I would have started, I'd have to say, close to 15 years ago.
Yeah, right.
So, I haven't homebrewed for a long time now, but professional brewer about 8 or 9 years ago. So about the 5 or 6 years before that.
Was there a moment during your homebrew where you're like, "Yep, this is kind of what I want to do. I want to, run a brewery, open a brewery"?
Yeah, I think certainly not at the start, but it gets to a point where you've spent. Whether or not how you started, whether you started because you wanted to brew something that you couldn't find in the country, or you're trying to save money, or all these things, it kind of becomes a little bit more than that as you get involved in it. I fell in love with brewing pretty early on. I have a science background, not so much an artistic background, but definitely a science background, and really fell in love with the process pretty early on. So it's something I love doing. I was doing it every weekend, and it took probably a few years before I thought, maybe this is something I could do.
So you went from home brewing. You went and opened. We had a lot of time with Riverside,
yep.
And then opened Akasha 2015, 16?
Yeah, 15.
15?
4.5 years.
Oh, fantastic! So 5 years. 5 years started at the end of this year.
It'll be in April next year, yeah. So we celebrate our birthday in April. So, time flies, eh?
Right. That's right. We see the annual wooden leg come out.
Yeah, favourite time of year, eh?
So I guess for Akasha, as we kind of dig into, I guess what behind what is the name and what's kind of behind the brewery. The name itself, I know it's kind of got some unique kind of meanings behind it, but what is it?
Yeah, it's got a few meanings behind it that some are and some aren't attributable to the brand. But for us, when we started looking around for names, it really struck a chord with us for a number of reasons. But the real reason was, I guess, the meaning of Akasha for us is the fifth element. We've taken some cues on that with some of our beers, as you know, but it really talks about you've got the four basic elements of life. And Akasha is that mythical fifth element that brings all those four elements together and creates something greater. So our four core beers were all based on one of the elements, our original four beers. And we also talk about it from a marketing perspective, from the hops, water, yeast, and malt, taking those four things and as a brewery creating something big and greater than those elements themselves.
Those four core beers, you've got the Tradewind Lager, Freshwater Pale,
yep.
Hopsmith IPA, and Fire Within Amber.
Yes, I think you got them all.
Yeah.
Well done. Don't need me at all. You can do the whole podcast yourself.
Yeah, I know. The four core beers, when you first came out, what was the first one that you brought out?
That was a real, being I guess my second brewery, and we certainly personally I'd made a name for myself as an IPA brewer. It was kind of expected that we're going to bring out an IPA as the first beer, so we kind of went against that and came out with Freshwater. So our first release was the Freshwater Pale Ale. I spent a lot of time prior to opening sort of developing that. It really is a reflection on what I fell in love with, like the Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, is really in that style of original West Coast Pale. It was the Freshwater.
All right, then you kind of move through the four styles?
Yeah, moved through the four. I think the IPA followed closely behind that. And it's still today, Freshwater is still our biggest seller. I think you'll find most breweries, certainly up until a couple of years ago, their Pale Ale was always their biggest seller. I think we're starting to see a few changes now where things are heading. But for us, it certainly is our biggest seller. But the Hopsmith, which really is the flagship of us and our brand, is sitting pretty closely behind. So for a big IPA, that's a pretty good effort we reckon.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned there that Freshwater is homage to the West Coast Pale.
Yep.
I guess the people out there, so used to Galaxy and Mosaic and Citra hops. It's a single hop Cascade.
Yeah, it is. So Cascades they call the classic C hops. The Centennials, the Cascades, and so on. So it really is for us that classic. We probably dry hop a little bit more. We do dry hop a little bit more than they would have 15, 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. We do double. We talk about double dry hops. We double dry hop most of our beers, but we certainly do put a fair whack of that American Cascade hop in the dry hop, giving it that sort of a little bit more of that sort of floral and pine and fruitiness that you get from Cascade. So a little bit more punchier these days, but other than that, pretty close to the originals.
Yeah, right. I guess that's a good kind of segue into a topic I thought to have a chat to you would be perfect about being, the IPA brewery. It's kind of new world versus old world hops.
Yeah.
If you want to put it like that, I'll even say actually old world American hops, not going way back. But what's been your thoughts on the trend to these, really fruity Galaxy, Mosaic, Citra compared to, the 3Cs or the classics?
Yeah.
What's your take on it?
Look, we kind of straddled both. I think originally when I was brewing IPAs, whether it's a home brew or before or after that, more traditional hops. Where we're sitting with our IPAs is definitely take whether it's Hopsmith or Corbin or one of our other classic IPAs, they're definitely sitting right in the pocket of a West Coast IPA. But we have started. We introduced into Corbin, for instance. That does have some Mosaic in there, along with the classics like Centennial and Simcoe. So I think it's a really important part of that beer, but it doesn't take center stage like a lot of the new age stuff does. Mosaic is such a great hop. I mean, it's certainly become one of our favourites, and we've now got our Mosaic IPA, which is one of our biggest sellers as well, which is just a single hop Mosaic. It's such a beautiful, complex, stunning hop. It can work all on its own. So we tend to mix both when we're talking about West Coast, whether it's pales or IPAs.
Yeah, right. I know for people listening to this, I guess most people just assume that, commercially brewing is just like home brewing, where you just walk down to your home brew supplies, buy your hops and go home. That's really not the case in the commercial world, and it's all around contracts. Are you able to just kind of let people know? Because I don't think many people actually know how that works.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, and something that keeps all the brewers awake a little bit at night, is just to make sure that we do have, particularly the popular ones like Mosaic and some of the newer hops. There's only so much to go around, so we can't just, as you say, just bring up the supplier any particular day of the week and say, can you shoot me over 100 kilos of Mosaic? We do need to contract that at least 12 months ahead of time. So presents all kinds of challenges. One, it lets me sleep better at night knowing that I've got the hops there, but it also means that we've got to think about what we're brewing well ahead of time. So we've got to have a good think about what we think we're going to be brewing in a year's time. And in this current environment, that's pretty damn tough.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine, especially with all the Haze craze and all those hops are different, I guess, to what you'd usually be using.
Yeah, we're using, and then we're getting involved in that. We've sort of, I wouldn't say we've been slow to the market. We've certainly been taking our time to get that style right. We love the style in the brewery. We love most IPAs, I think, but Haze is certainly something we love to drink and something we've been spending a lot of time developing. We have a little pilot brewery here that we brew on quite regularly, and we're developing a couple of new beers that'll be coming out soon. But anyone who's been lucky enough to come down to the brewery on the cellar door may have tasted it a couple of times. But you're right, there are some newer hops that really lend themselves to that style. You've got the classics. Obviously, Mosaic works well across both West Coast and Hazy, and Citra as well. But Galaxy certainly is turning out to be one of the favourites all around the world for Hazy style.
Is there any issues with, I guess, obviously the style being so popular in America? Like you said, there is only so much going around. Do you have issues where you just simply can't get a certain hop?
As long as we contract, we're usually okay. If we decide that we could bring, Haze is a good example. We're going to try something else with a new hop that we hadn't contracted, and that can become challenging. There were some big hop shortages on all sorts of hops, a good 5-6 years ago. A lot of those sort of kinks have been ironed out. New Zealand hops are always tough to get. But Galaxy, I think, you really need to be contracted well ahead for something like Galaxy as well, because it's popular here, but it's really popular in the States, and there's a lot more breweries over there who need it. So you need to make sure you contract it nice and early on that one. So as long as we're forward thinking enough, we work with some great companies here in Australia that source our hops for us, and as I say, think forward enough, we're okay. If it's something new right in the middle of the season, they might struggle a little bit.
Yeah, right. Have you got a personal favourite hop?
Oh, it's like asking what my favourite beer is. There's two questions I get asked all the time. What's my favourite hop and what's my favourite beer that we make? But I think if it was something if I could only have one hop, it would definitely be Mosaic. Yeah. The Mosaic IPA, the Mosaic IPA was a single release that we did. It has to be a year and a half ago now, and it's been incredibly popular. In fact, it's just been promoted to a full-time core beer for us. So that's right, yeah. It looks like people agree with me, which is good.
Yeah, I think for me, Mosaics, out of all the single hop IPAs I've had, they're definitely the most balanced, and they kind of work both ways. Most normally aromatics or bittering, well, it kind of does both really well.
Yeah, and it certainly fits in all across across the boil, across the ferment. But it's for me, the two hops that do that well are Cascade and Mosaic. They both have different qualities depending on where you use them, and even in the dry hop, depending on when we dry hop, we can get different characteristics out of the hop. Where in the boil we get different, so we can get quite a complex beer out of a single hop IPA, which is kind of cool. Some of the other hops are a little bit one-dimensional, but Mosaic certainly ain't one of those.
Yeah, we mentioned briefly the Haze craze that you guys love the style. I think it's just taken the industry by storm.
Mm.
Did you ever see it coming? Were you ever kind of looking at the American trends and think that's going to hit Australia like it has, or is it kind of taken you by surprise like it has us?
Oh, yeah, a little bit. For the first 6 to 12 months, I was wondering whether it would hang around. We as drinkers, we were onto them pretty early. As I said, we've taken a long time to come to market. They're a very, very difficult beer to brew well, like same as West Coast. I mean, we spent years developing that, developing how to brew West Coast as well. Brewing a hazy or a New England or whatever you want to call it is, you've heard it probably before. It's turning all of our processes on their heads and doing almost the opposite. But it's important that by changing our process, we're not being lazy. We're just doing them differently. So we've taken our time to be able to make sure that we're doing it right, to make sure that we're brewing, not just a beer full of yeast, but a beer with proper permanent haze and that beautiful, luscious mouthfeel and the right hops. It takes time to get it right.
Yeah, I think those sort of styles, and I've spoken to a few brewers about this, and it's one of the questions I ask a fair bit on these podcasts.
Yep.
And is it just a case of taking the brewery and using it differently, or do you actually have to? Do you actually have to kind of use different bits of materials, or like different kit? Is it same kit, different method, or do you actually have to get new things in?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It certainly is different methods. I mean, we're still using the same brewery. We use some different ingredients. We, all the way back to the start of the brew, the water profile of this beer is so different to a West Coast IPA. So, the salts that we use to get the water profile right are quite different. Using a lot more hops, which is a bit frustrating in Australia because they cost a lot. So they're very expensive to make. But it's more about the process. It's about, everything from the temperature that you mash to the way that you mash. And so for us, it's process. We can do it all with in terms of equipment, we can pretty much do with all the equipment we've got, just using it a little bit differently.
Yeah, right. You mentioned there that that they are very expensive and just the ingredients that are in it. Another kind of a key trend lately, from our research and our survey that we've found is limited releases, and people always want new. I guess, how have you found that trend? Like, I guess 5-6 years ago it was still kind of there, but not like it is now. Like, people just have a thirst for new.
Yeah.
From a brewer's and a brewery point, how do you find that?
It's again, two aspects to it. I think there's good and bad aspects to that. I think as brewers, if we put the business of beer aside, and as brewers, it's fantastic, right? We get to brew all sorts of cool stuff every week. Again, it's important that for us, it's important that we if it's a new style, that we become good brewers of that style before we release something to market. We don't just go and try something and put it out in the market. But so it's pretty exciting. We get to brew different things all the time. But from a business perspective, it's not very good for business and a sustainable business model. So we're big believers, one, in that our core beers are beers that we've been brewing for a long time, and we do put a lot of effort into making better and better and better. So they will be the best in class. But it's important for us as a business to ensure that our core beers and our beers available all year round are our biggest sellers. It's a pretty tough business to be churning out new beers every week. So we cut it down the middle. We have our core range, which takes up a big large chunk of our business, which is great. And then we push out a seasonal at least once a month. So keeps it interesting, keeps the bar full, keeps our customers happy, keeps their customers happy. Seems to be a pretty good mix for us.
Yeah, I feel that kind of mix seems to be working. There's some breweries that can put out ridiculous amounts of new beers, and I sometimes sit back and I'm like, I don't know how they do it. I don't know how hard it is for us to just get the products online, let alone let alone make the beers. So yeah, I think that kind of method is working really well from our point as well. And I guess on that limited release kind of side of it, going into the last kind of part of it, point about the beers, your limited release that I guess you're most known for is Corbin D.
Yep.
Which I think is now a quarterly release.
3 times a year. So, yeah.
3 times a year?
Yeah, it used to be 4, now it's 3. So, yeah.
Yep. I guess, it's your most well-known beer, I'd say, in Australia. What is it?
Good question. It's
Opposed to the obvious of just a double IPA.
It's a classic. Again, getting back to our roots and what we dearly love to do. It's a classic West Coast double IPA. It's what we love to do. It's what we we talk about. Our core flagship is our Hot Smith, but our seasonal flagship is definitely our Corbin D. We release it 3 times a year. We brew a lot of it. Again, it's a pretty expensive beer for us to brew. There's a lot of hops in it, carefully used. I think probably the difference between Corbin now, or what it would be now, or what it would have been 10 years ago, is probably just a little, just sort of backing off that business a little bit. I think a double IPA release 10 or 15 years ago was a very, very bitter beer. So what we've worked hard on with Corbin is to make sure that it is a West Coast double IPA. It's got the bitterness there, but it's also got all those beautiful flavours and aromas coming through, which means we just need to back that bitterness off a little bit. So it's sitting there at about 60 IBU, whereas before they were up around 80 to 100.
And have you used that kind of same amount of hops, but using them differently, or is it just backing off on the hops as well?
In terms of the bitterness, or
just kind of in general, is it kind of more late edition aromatic hops?
How
you're using them?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, most of our IPAs, because they are so aromatic and because we are putting so much hops into late in the process, like the Whirlpool, the bittering hops are pretty minimal these days. And in the old days, we used to put quite a big charge of hops in at the start of the boil to create that bitterness. But even that short, 10 to 20 minute contact time in the Whirlpool with some pretty big hops. A lot of these hops that we're using for aromatics have a lot of alpha acid content, so are creating, even just in that short time, almost enough bitterness for the IPA or the double IPA on its own. So the bitterness charge is pretty small anyway.
Yeah, right. I guess on the Corbin D, I mentioned right back at the start, going back onto your 5th birthday, once a year you do a triple IPA, wood leg.
Yep.
I remember for this year's release, we had Gab here. I don't know if you're able to tell the story about where that beer came from, because it's a pretty entertaining story. Is that a story you're able to tell?
It certainly is. Hopefully, I tell it the same way as Gab. He doesn't show me up, but it really harks back to right back when we were building the brewery itself. So whilst we built the brewery, we were contracting, but we spoke about the freshwater and the hot smiths being our first releases. We're actually brewing those off site whilst we built the brewery, and I took a good 6 months off to spend my time doing that properly. We took delivery of the brewery and got it inside, had the floor installed previously and all, and we're ready to put the brewery together. So painstakingly did so over a couple of weeks, and one of the last vessels that we put in, that we stood up, was the cold liquor tank, and the cold liquor tank was missing a leg. It was a bit like when you're building a piece of IKEA furniture, you get right at the end and you're missing a piece. We're not quite sure whether we put it somewhere where it shouldn't have been, or they actually forgot to put it in the container. But we were missing a leg, so we're sort of sitting there holding this tank out, going, "Where's the bloody leg?" Couldn't find it, and fashioned a temporary wooden leg out of a block of wood that was out of the packing materials that the brewery came in. So knocked a piece of wood together, chopped it under there with the aim to order a new leg. And as with all of these things, that wooden leg still remains today. I should check it, actually. I hope it's probably got that much waterlog and everything in it. It might not be very stable, but it's still there. We show people every year.
Yes, it's a great story, those sort of things. And I guess that's kind of the point of these podcasts, is to get into those inside stories and find out those little things. I guess last on these kind of trends that I've kind of been talking about.
Yep.
When you first started out, you said you're brewing freshwater and Hopsmith. They're also in 500ml bottles. How have you found this, even more than the haze craze, but this massive move to cans?
Yes, it was something we held off on for a little while. We were talking about cans at the start of the brewery. We made the decision we were only going to be doing, well, let me take it back a step. Initially, we were keg only. So when we first started the brewery, we'd focus on the beers, get them right, say, and kegs. Then we'd move to small production in bottles. And then we were going to make a decision after that as to where we went after that. But at that time, it was relatively small production. Bottles were still prevalent. So for us, it was more a decision about whether we went into 375ml bottles or 500ml bottles. And we kind of went for that more premium aspect. We always saw ourselves as a premium brand. So figured that the 500 bottles fitted into that quite well. So they went pretty well for us. But, we did that for a good year and a half. And certainly we did make the decision clearly to go to cans after that. And the increase in sales for cans for us was quite phenomenal from when we switched from 500 to the 375ml cans. It was instantly recognisable as something that we should, maybe not something we should have done before, but it certainly was the right way to go.
Has the whole industry trend to cans kind of taken you by surprise?
Oh, well, I guess we did it for a reason, right? I mean, for me as a brewer, that was the first reason why we did it. Put aside costs and everything else, it really is or has become a better receptacle for beer at the smaller end of the market. So, 5-6 years ago, there wasn't. I don't think there was the machinery wasn't good enough for the small end of the scale. Now it clearly is. Now the can is clearly better for the beer. We talk about the lack of oxygen. We talk about the lack of light. We talk about the green aspect. It's light. It's fit more on a palate. There's so many good aspects to canning that's the first reason we did it. But it took a little while for the punter to understand and realise why we were doing it. We got a lot of questions. Why would you put it in a can? That's what Tui is for.
Yeah, I know we get all those questions, and for us, our advent calendar which we just launched is 100% cans this year.
Yeah,
we outside of some of the the big imperial stouts and wild ales and stuff, we can't move bottles from a retail point. It's been absolutely phenomenal.
It's amazing, in such a short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really been, we were only talking about it, I think, last night, and we don't think there's been an industry that's had such a change in packaging, a fundamental change in such a short time. It's been absolutely staggering.
Yeah, right. That's great.
You mentioned there as well how the cans really kind of promoted the growth and just instantly took off. I was reading on your blog just before here about an article you posted end of last year, and that in the second half you had a 70% growth by volume.
Yep.
Those growths are obviously fantastic, but what challenges comes along with that?
With that level of growth, there's quite a lot. And I think, we always talk about, particularly here in the brewery, is that we want to be growing. In fact, we've got, we're all ex-business people, so we have some very strong, whilst beer is number one for us, we certainly have try and operate a very strong business behind it. So strong growth is important, and we try, and we're looking to double the size of the brewery every couple of years, which we've done and continue to do. But you don't want to go too fast either. And I think for us as a brand, our brand is about hop-forward beers, but it's also about quality. A lot of people go on about quality, but it really is at the core of everything that we do. Everything that we do in the brewery, from a business and a brewing side, a question is always asked about, how does this affect quality? So to go back to your question, rapid growth can affect that adversely if you're not careful. So I think our growth is relatively aggressive, but we wouldn't want to be any more aggressive than that.
And I think in terms of, I guess you mentioned you would double the brewery every couple of years. Those more tanks and less, and you can't just walk around the corner and buy more tanks.
Yeah.
You've certainly got to forecast that and work on that. But you had the expansion of the brewery about a couple of years ago now?
We've expanded twice now. So, in line with what we were saying before, in terms of doubling our growth, we're 4 times bigger than we were 4 years ago. So it's not a lot of fun, actually. It's a lot of work and a lot of stress, but obviously you can't expand without more tank space. So, the last one was, you're probably right, actually, about a year and a half ago.
Is there another one on the horizon?
Yeah, so that was a big expansion. So we've had a little bit of spare space for a while, but we're almost even just now in the first couple of weeks of spring, where we're getting dangerously close to it. So we're madly running around planning our next expansion. Probably a bit late now for this summer, but probably plan it for the beginning of next year, and that will be probably another doubling of the space we have now, which will be pretty intense.
So do you have in your current location the floor space to double the tank space, or do you have to look to take on more floor space?
Yeah, we were lucky enough about mid last year that we took over the guys next to us. Bad for them, they went out of business. Good for us, there was a spare unit next door. So we doubled our floor space there. So we've got the original space with the brewery, the tasting room, the brewery, the majority of the fermenters. So we've got space to build essentially a tank farm next door, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, awesome. I guess moving on from Akasha and kind of the story, another key point that yourself personally be involved in is the IPA, so the Independent Brewers Association.
Yep.
You stepped down last year from one of the directors.
Yep. What's
your kind of view, and how do you feel the industry is going, coming from that kind of side of it?
It was a really interesting time. As brewers, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm glad I did it then. I certainly don't have the time now. But we went through a lot of changes, both as an industry and as an association during that time. I was involved in moving from the CVIA to the IBA, which was a very long, drawn-out, intensive, stressful process. But really, really important to us as an industry as we were growing up. I mean, we were getting bigger. Initially, when we were the Craft Beer Industry Association, we were small enough to kind of need the help of the bigger guys. But as we grew in numbers and grew in quality and grew in everything, it became pretty clear that they were actually holding us back a little bit. So it was an important part of the growth as an industry and as the association to become the IBA, which we did, which is really exciting.
Were you there for the logo, for the label?
Yeah, and also that was part of that. So shortly after that, we released the seal. So we became the IBA, and then it's important to get the message out there that about who we are and what we represent. So that was another good part of it, and that continues to grow. And the new board is doing a great job in spreading that word, and now really getting ready to really hit that hard and get that message out to consumers that if you believe in small business and independence and all the great things that we represent, then keep an eye out for that seal on the can or the bottle, because it's really bloody important.
Yeah, absolutely. I know from a independence point and the IBA and the seal, from an industry point, the beer has been in decline for, I think it's 40 something years now.
Yep.
Craft beer is on the rise and has been for a few years now, or for a long time. Where do you see the craft beer scene going and the industry going? I guess what else do we need to do to keep it increasing?
Good question. One close to my heart. It's the industry means a hell of a lot to me, and hence why I did my term on the board, and why all of those guys do that is that this is what they love the industry and want to see it succeed. It is getting a lot. I mean, it's a lot bigger than it used to be. We're talking 700 breweries now, which is just bloody insane. And we talk about the United States and that we're following the United States, but per capita, we're pretty much almost there. So we've reached a point where, is it saturation? I'm not sure. I think we've got a little way to go. I don't think there's enough people drinking craft or independent beer yet. So I don't think we're at saturation. But the second point of your question was, how do we ensure we grow and how we get there? I think quality has always been the number one for me anyway, and was also one of my soapboxes when I was with the IBA was quality, because as an industry, we all need to be drinking. Well, that's what we need to be drinking, but we need to be creating quality beer to ensure that we bring across more people to this side of the fence. All it takes is one bad beer or one, at the start of a craft beer journey for an individual, and it may be enough for them to turn back. So quality for me is far and away one of the most important things that as an industry we need to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. I know from us at Beer Cartel, we always, get asked the question, what's craft beer? Is it this, or is it, what is it? And, for us, we've always had two answers. People will say, it's independence, which we don't necessarily agree with.
Yeah.
It's certainly a major point, but for us, first and foremost, it's quality.
Yeah.
So it's for us, the dream scenario is this quality beer made by an independent brewery, but just because you're independent doesn't mean it's necessarily craft or quality.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. And it's so important.
So last but not least, I had a question from my colleague. This is for him, Oliver. He asked me, are you going to can Bittersmith?
Bittersmith?
Is it your Grapefruit IPA?
Oh, I'd almost forgotten about it.
He was hassling me when he found out I was doing a podcast.
I remember that. We do use, as you probably know, we do use the Smith's name in a few of our beers. Well, obviously the little, started with the Hot Smith, we had the Little Smith, we had the Black Smith, which was, people think that style is going out of favour, but I disagree. That is a great beer, and we sell a lot of it. The Black Smith, which is our black IPA. The Bittersmith was the Grapefruit IPA that we had on tasting room only. No plans at this stage. I don't know if that's the right answer or not.
So there you go. That's a request from him. We'd love to see that in the package form.
You'll have to come down to the tasting. We do put it on probably once a quarter or something, and yeah, everybody loves it. But you never know. Never say never. I've learned in this game not to say never, and I've done a lot of those things over the years. Brewing a lot of stuff now that I said I never would. I said I'd never can. I said I'd never brew a lager. So there you go.
Yeah, there's both of those. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Everyone out there, drink the Akasha beer. It's always fantastic. And thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Akasha really does set the benchmark for quality and consistency for beers in Australia, and I can't wait to see where they go in the future. Once again, thank you so much to Dave for chatting to me today, and if you have any questions, please let us know in our Facebook group, Beer Cartel's Craft Beer Collective. If you'd like to continue to stay up to date with the latest from the craft beer industry, please subscribe at either iTunes Podcast, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. That's it for today. I'll see you next time.